How's everybody doing tonight?
I don't know.
All doing good?
I'm just
All right, well, we're going to get started tonight. Welcome everyone to our second MU student roundtable discussion. Tonight we're going to be going over all the top issues regarding the upcoming elections. So, my name is Abraham Medali. I am the graduate assistant for the Walker Center. With me tonight, please help me in welcoming Kelsey Snavely. She's the co-moderator for tonight with me. And tonight we're gonna be hosting, as the Walker Center is gonna be hosting Republicans, College Democrats, and the College Libertarians. Is anybody in the crowd Green Party? If you are, come on forward if you want. No? All right. So, tonight's going to be a very eventful evening. We're going to be covering, like I said, all the top issues. And some of these issues affect us every day. Some of these may affect us on the national security level. Some of them may affect us on how we interact with one another on a day-to-day basis. Some of them, it's how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others around us. And some of them actually are how we perceive our nation and cooperating with other nations as well. So tonight we're going to be going in, diving deep, and trying to clarify all these issues, see if you guys an in-depth look at what each party's stance is on every issue, and try to clarify it as much as possible. The rules for the roundtable discussion tonight are going to be as follows. And rules on the main topics we're going to have are immigration and refugees. After that is going to be Black Lives Matter and policing. Third is going to be mental health. Yes. And fourth is going to be Iraq and Afghanistan. Pretty much our foreign hotspots. So each topic is going to have 15 minutes, and each respective party is going to have 2 minutes, a strict 2 minutes, to answer the question. That's going to be posed by myself or Kelsey. After that is happening and they're going to be discussing each topic, we will then have a Q&A session at the end from approximately 8:30 till start of the debate. So let's get right to it with the first topic. First topic is immigration and refugees. So according to the UN Refugee Agency, or the UNHCR, there's an unprecedented 65.3 million people around the world that have been forced from their home. Among them are 21.3 million people, or refugees, all of whom are under the age of 18. So President Obama, he recently enacted a law that would increase the number of refugees that the U.S. takes in every year. So he's also ordered the U.S. government to admit no fewer, than 10,000 Syrian refugees in the next fiscal year. Some say that this is actually going to cause a national security threat. For instance, if you have groups like ISIS and other terrorist groups that slip in within the refugee population. So the question tonight would be, what should the United States policy be on refugee crisis and prepping these people to be formally assimilate into American culture and citizenship? Who wants to go first? Democrats. Go for it.
Okay. Oh, it doesn't matter. I can go. Okay, that's fine. So, as far as immigrants and refugees, that's obviously a huge issue right now. And for our party, we support bringing more in. As Barack Obama is the president, and he supports that. So, a big issue that I've kind of see with that is that these people have homes where they're from, and that their quality of life, even in a home, is so negative and so horrible that they're willing to come here, either illegally or even being homeless on the streets, whatever it takes to come into our country, that their quality of life is so poor that they want to come to us, or even other countries in the UN. I think it is important for us to accept these people. They have such horrible warfare going on in their homes. They're being destroyed. Their education system is oblique. So it is really important for us to bring them in, and I think that we do need to have tight security. I think that we do need to have a harder process than just saying okay, here's an open door, come on in. We do need to make it that there is guidelines that have to be followed, but we should be accepting people.
Yeah, I think to hit on Caitlin's point, just because it's not necessarily happening here doesn't mean that these things aren't happening. These people are families with small children, and their homes are being bombed by their own government. And so often they try to come here in an escape from the horrible lives that they are living. And people assume that this is going to leave an opening for groups like ISIS and terrorist organizations. But so many of these people are just families with children. And Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. So to say that the majority of these people are radical is ridiculous. Most of them are just people like us. And I think that it's a wise move for the president and for our party to bring immigrants in and Syrian refugees in, because it helps us keep tabs on who these people are when they come over. Just in the sense that we can see who it is that's coming. By turning our back on these people, we don't know who's coming. So.
Who's next?
Sure. I'd say to add on to that, just go back to the foundation of America and point out the fact that we are a country of immigrants from the beginning. And I'd say to to steal a line from one of the candidates, one of the things that makes America great is the fact that people had the ability to immigrate here from other countries during earlier parts of American history and start out new lives. If you look at, for example, immigration and refugees from Ireland during the potato famine, for example. And I don't believe that we should discount people just because of their belief, especially if we're going to stand by our First Amendment. So I think it's kind of contradictory for us to disallow refugees solely based on the fact that that they follow a certain religion. And again, I have to agree to the point with the Democrats when they said that many of these people that are coming are families. And again, that goes back to the idea that America can continue to be a place where people can start a new life and start, a search for, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and everything else that we, flash all over the place in our government. So I think that it would be contradictory for us to stand by the ideals that we have instilled as Americans and to turn these people away. To do both is contradictory, in my opinion. Ben, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Just a little thing to add on there. For every one terrorist that lives in the Middle East, this region where all these refugees are coming from, there are thousands of innocents behind them trying to get out of this region that has been just ravaged by war for plenty of years now, and it's ridiculous the fact that they still have to keep dealing with it. But as Dan said, America has always been a safe haven for other people who are going through a struggle in their homeland. And to deny people now because they come from a different religion, because they come from a different place, is completely it's completely ridiculous. And really, we should keep our borders open and keep being the safe haven that America has been for all these years in the past, while still erring on the side of caution as to who we let in, but we shouldn't close it completely.
America's always been a place where we've helped people who can't help themselves. And I think a lot of people who'd say, why don't they just go back to their own country? People specifically in Syria, they really don't have a home country to go back to. Their home doesn't exist anymore as they knew it. I think we do need to have safeguards for people coming in here. They need to be vetted. But I think ultimately we need to do what's best for these refugees and find ones that would have the easiest time assimilating here to come here. Because I think a lot of the Arab nations, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they have money, they have resources, just like we do. And I think many of these people share more values with people in the Middle East than they would here. That's not to say there aren't immigrants. For instance, Glenn Beck has a private organization. I think he brought in maybe between 100 and 400. I forget the exact number, but they went over. People that worked for him went over. They vetted these people. They were Christian. They brought them back. And I think there is definitely a place in America to help these people get back on their feet again.
I agree. I I look at America's history as a charitable nation, and there's no quarrel there with continuing that charitability. But I also think that there is room for common sense when there is a credible threat amongst whatever group it may be that we are accepting into our society. And I think that is the case here. I look at people like the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Switzerland, who recently came out and said that they will be having to reject and send back at least half of their refugee applicants because they are not refugees seeking asylum for fear of death or persecution, etc., but because they're economic refugees, meaning they're leaving countries like Morocco, for example, sent a great deal of them. And as far as America and our policy is concerned, I agree. I believe that we should have a space for legitimate refugees who are fearing for their lives and have nowhere else to go. But I do think that we should be looking into a deeper vetting process, not just of refugees, but I think it just makes sense that anyone, for example, who's been in any one of those regions within a certain number of years, etc., should have their background looked into a little bit more, the way we do with anyone who is involved with children in this country and has to have background checks that may show something that could be harmful to those children. And so that's basically our stance.
For discussion.
I think we might have agreed.
So, I mean, I guess rebuttals or? I don't think there's a whole lot we disagree on. I do think, however, you guys brought up in both instances the America's history of being a nation of immigrants. And while I completely agree with that, I think that sometimes we conflate that time and the state that the country was in with today's time. Meaning we have a far larger welfare state today than we did in the 1914s, in the early 1900s. Which is why I brought up the issue of separating between not just economic refugees, but immigration that does not necessarily come in and have the same opportunities that everyone else has to move upward in the economic ladder. And so I think that we should be looking for example, I did a project in which, and I'm very grateful to one of my professors because he made us debate the pros and cons of certain issues, even if you did not agree with them. And one thing that I found was that it is indeed true that oftentimes a lot of Mexican immigrants, for example, are taken advantage of by corporations who lobby to keep them, as their slaves, essentially. And I think that something does need to be done about that. Does have to be done about that. But we also have to consider their effects on our society if they continue to be here on an illegal basis. It's not just having an effect on us; it's having an effect on them. And if we're going to talk about that, then we need to talk common sense. And I may not agree with a wall per se, and I don't think Anthony does either. But I think that's something we need to talk more about.
And if we're going to shift gears slightly towards immigration, versus refugees and the immigration side of this whole deal, at least in my opinion, I think the problem and the reason that these corporations are able to, induce what some may refer to as slavery upon these illegal immigrants, and I think the reason that we have so many issues with illegal immigration in America and people who are not legal citizens is I think that it's just because the system is broken. I think we need to overhaul and shrink down the application system at this point about immigration, because when it comes to America, there's a lot of things that we enjoy our red tape for. And I think immigration is one of those places that we need to start slashing some of that back, because the reason that they don't want to go through this long process is because this process may take 5, 10, 15 years for them to become legal citizens, whereas they, the people who are coming here illegally, whether it be for economic reasons or for just a betterment of their life in general, they need that relief on a more immediate scale than looking a decade or more down the road. So I think a way that we can curb that problem and decrease illegal immigration would be to make the system easier and more accessible to those people, and not have it be a program where they start the process of becoming an American citizen and they get here just in time to like retire and sit there because they're 75 years old waiting for the system to go through. Now that's a bit of an extreme example, of course, but I still stand by the fact that I think it's the red tape and ridiculous amount of time that it takes for this process that causes people to go for a route of illegal immigration.
And on the other side of that too, we need to start holding big corporations responsible for their illegal use of illegal immigrants. To quote the documentary Food Inc., one of the biggest chicken producers out there, Purdue, would actually send vans through the border legally, take illegal immigrants to work for them back in the United States, pay them less than the minimum wage, which of course is illegal by any means, and then just send them back to the border. And then once those immigrants got caught living in the United States illegally, Purdue wouldn't step up and back them up saying, hey, we've been employing these guys. So big companies, not just Purdue, but everyone, or almost everyone, has taken advantage of this illegal practice, and America has just been sitting back and not taking advantage of it.
I mean, looking at a local spectrum, Pennsylvania has a lot of agriculture that we rely on illegal immigrants to work for. I'm from a slightly more western part of the state in York County, nearly in Adams County, which have quite a few farms, especially for apples, which employ many illegal immigrants in order to work those farms, just because it's a cheaper source. And I think if we can figure out a way to make it so these illegal immigrants have better options than to go with these corporations, and again, that would be by easing the system and making it so it's not a huge bureaucratic red tape mess. I think that would alleviate the problem, so they won't have to rely on these corporations to enforce them or force them into an indentured servitude type situation.
I guess one of the question I have, and somewhere where there might be more differences, in the term illegal. We know that these people are indeed breaking the law, and so I think somewhere we differentiate is that oftentimes on the Democratic side, there is a hesitancy to say that we should be enacting any sort of punitive measures on someone who is running from a worse state into a better state of living in the United States. But I also see how unfair that is to those who do not have, who have not gone through that, who have gone through the legal process and have paid thousands of dollars, and whose families have had to wait many years after them in order to get into the country. And so I don't think that it is fair that to those people who have gone through that extremely long process that we just described as not very desirable, and spend money and time and emotion in the process, only to see that so many millions, frankly, are going to get through that system without any sort of, with complete amnesty. While they do not receive all of the welfare benefits that we may receive as citizens of the United States, they do benefit a great deal from other kinds of social welfare or sort of net services that we provide in our communities. And that is, I think, indisputable fact. And I do believe that there is a way to assimilate illegal immigrants here, but also show that we stand by our laws and that no one is above them, not an elite and not someone who is running from a poor state.
Thank you for the discussion that we had on this. We can always come back to it during our question and answer time. Next, we're going to move to the Black Lives Matter and policing issues. Given current... We're getting fancy.
This is innovation.
Seriously. It's cool, I can talk loud. So, given current incidents of police-involved shootings that have occurred over the past 2 years and longer, and the rise of civil rights groups such as Black Lives Matter, how do you think relations between law enforcement and the community at large can be improved? We'll start with the Republicans.
Yeah, I spoke in front of the NAACP and Black Student Union a few weeks ago about this very issue. I think there are many things we can do to improve relations and help to alleviate this problem. First and foremost, the drug war is a miserable failure and it needs to end. Millions, or not probably not millions, probably thousands of young people, especially young black males, are being put away for having a little bit of drugs on them, a few ounces, and because of our mandatory minimum sentencing in our country, that judge is not allowed to use discretion and say, okay, does this person really need to be locked away? Another thing that I think could really alleviate the problem is body cameras. In communities where body cameras were installed, I saw a stat that the complaints against that department went down by 91%. Body camera, or any type of filming when both parties know they're being filmed, that ensures that everybody is civil with each other. Because if that cop uses excessive force, there's hard evidence for it. Or if the person, the citizen interacting with that police officer is, acting not calm, their hands are all around their pockets, they're attacking the officer maybe, that's going to be hard evidence too. So these body cameras ensure that both the citizens in the community and the police themselves are on their best behavior and acting in the way that we all, idealistically, we hope they'd act. Thirdly, I'd say the militarization of police is something that needs to end. The Department of Defense sells unused military surplus. They sell it to these police departments, and people who are really untrained, using these weapons of war in our streets, and it really reinforces the idea in these communities that the police are out to get you. It's us versus them, and they're not. If you're in trouble, don't go up to the police officer because they won't help you. If demilitarization of police happens, I think you'll see a lot less separation between citizen and police.
Just add something real quick. We'll give him an extra 15 seconds. I think that I think one of the issues with the Black Lives Matter movement is that at least oftentimes on the conservative side, or not necessarily the conservative side, this broadly divisive even across party lines, is a bit of tone deafness. And actually, I'm quoting my friend here when I say tone deaf, but the sentiment applies, and that is that we as conservatives, we as Republicans understand that it's not that no other lives matter. It is the fact that there is a perception within the black community that their lives are of less worth in our society than anyone else's, whether that be by police or, in all kinds of other situations. But I also do believe that we need to look at things and not just on the police side, but on the societal side. I was born in Paterson, New Jersey. I spent some time in Puerto Rico, came back to New Jersey. Most of my family lived there, and whether it was Hispanic or black, many of us knew all of the one-liners about police that we could possibly know that were all negative for the most part. The popos here, the coppers, and all of these names and how bad they are and all of these things. Don't go up to a cop. Yet we've never had interaction with a single police officer. And I asked myself, how is it that we can talk this way with such conviction about people we've never or barely even interacted with? And to be honest, within these cultures, which are not racial, it's not racial what I'm talking about, but more, I would say, among poverty lines and opportunity lines, there are sort of mob mentalities of these sorts of things, with this sort of sense that is very anti-authority. And I agree. I think there should be cameras because that sort of brings accountability to both ends of the spectrum. But
I'm gonna have to
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So I think so often there's a misconception that being pro-Black Lives Matter means that you're anti-police, which is absolutely untrue. But I think that in these cases, I have to agree with my Republican counterparts in the sense that there needs to be more accountability in our police force. And wearing body cameras, demilitarizing police can help alleviate those problems. But it doesn't help anybody to pretend that there isn't a divide between minority communities and police officers. So those kind of instilling accountability helps to bridge that gap, knowing that when police officers shoot, there's more to the story that's being broadcast. There's more accountability there. Because people in the Black Lives Matter community may not get the whole story, or And the same token, we know when police officers are in the wrong. And I think it helps bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think again, just reiterating what everyone said as far as like accountability, that's I think going to be one of the best ways just to make sure that like what's most fair and what's the best judgment for these cases when shootings do occur. And I also agree that we do need to have a better relationship with officers and with minority communities. I read a book before, and it was about an African American lawyer, and he said that when he was in law school, a police officer came up to him and was like, "What are you doing out this late at night in this nice neighborhood?" Well, he lived in that nice neighborhood, and he said his whole entire life that he was taught when you see a cop, you run. And that's what his first instinct was, but then he said, as a lawyer, I know I'll get in trouble and I could get shot if I run, so I shouldn't do that. And what he now aims to do is to have police officers come into the schools of minorities, into the low poverty areas to teach kids that they're not bad, they want to help you. And so I think that that would be really important, is to just increase like the knowledge on both spectrums. Also, you tend to see shootings occur with the police officers that aren't very knowledgeable about the community. They're very young, they're very new, very fresh, haven't been trained a lot. The police officers that have been in that community for years, they know how it runs, they know the heartbeat of it, they know the insides and out. So they can tell you about the different groups and the different people and how all their beliefs coordinate with each other. So I think that we do need to increase training and not just hand someone a gun right away, that they do need to be, knowing that community better before they react.
I think one of the things that you hear from the other two parties here is that they use the terms, they tend to go to the extremes of pro-Black Lives Matter, anti-Black Lives Matter, pro-police, anti-police. And I think we need to realize that this has it comes from a position where we need people to come together. I know the Democrats did talk about police going into more impoverished communities and talking to these individuals that are more susceptible to affiliations with drugs or affiliation with gangs and stuff like that, and bridging this gap and teaching them that police aren't someone that you should fear. On the same token, it was brought up the topic of authority with police, and I think that as described by both people or by both parties, the police are members of these same communities that they are policing everything. And they are, they live there and they understand the way it works and the whole pulse that you referred to. And I think that we need to realize that it needs to be more of a cooperation instead of a necessarily a hardline authority. Because if you don't, if you continue to, stick that authority line out there, that dissuades people because they believe that they're being oppressed in some nature and not being helped with in some way. And I think if we can be more cooperative, that would be better. And I think a source of that would be from looking at programs that are in these communities with, for example, like after-school programs in order to keep kids that are at risk of falling into these categories of drugs and gang violence away from that. And I think if we can put effort into those programs and begin to bridge this gap mutually and not just say that one side's bad and the other side is good, as many people have boiled this argument down to, we can start getting somewhere if we start viewing each other as equals and not necessarily like this person's doing something wrong, we need to fix just this side. And then I believe Ben also has something else to expand upon with the body cameras.
I just have a couple points to make. First off, Dan, you mentioned how police officers actually have to live in the neighborhoods that they police, and I actually do know a friend personally who's actually my former boss, who he actually tried to become a Wilmington police officer, and they require that you live in the city of Wilmington for at least 5 years before they can even consider you for the force. So just to further on that point, and the point I wanted to make about body cameras, hard evidence does not matter when someone's son or daughter is murdered by an authority figure. It's a shame that we are in the year 2016 and still our police officers cannot think twice when they approach somebody's car, when they can't think of when they can't think right during a normal traffic stop. The fact that, I can't remember his name, the man who got murdered with his child literally in the back seat. Something has to be done. And so I think our police officers need a revamping of their training. They need to get education when it comes to high pressure situations, because it is obvious that when these police officers get into very stressful situations where they have to make a decision in a millisecond, they aren't making the right one. So I think it has to start at the core, and that when officers are getting trained, they have to learn how to take the less lethal option out. They need to take the most peaceful way, restrain them physically, but not so much that it injures them. And so, like, my grandfather was a state trooper. He worked with auto theft, stealing cars, working with all those kind of people, and he never had to pull his gun out once. Never had to pull out his gun once. So why officers who are just doing regular DUI traffic stops in the middle of the night are pulling their guns out like it's nothing? It's insane. So something has to be done at the root of all these problems.
Yeah, so good. I wish I brought up a pen and paper here tonight. It's hard to keep track of all the points that I want to respond to, but I hear a lot of pressure being put, or weight being put on the officer side of things. And while I do agree that we need to do a better job of training, and like my law enforcement teacher, who I still know to this day, 2 years I took his classes in high school, 3 periods at a time, every day, taught me community policing is an extremely valuable way to go about solving some of these issues, because yes, the police officers do know the people that they're in there, that they're whose communities they're patrolling, but the reality of it is that it's a lot more difficult to do, because a lot of these neighborhoods today are difficult for an officer with a partner to even drive in a car by without some sort of interaction at times, let alone having to walk some of these communities. But what I really wanted to talk about was the authority aspect of things. You may have situations where yes, there are officers who sort of carry a chip on their shoulder and maybe let it get to them a little bit too much. But I don't think that it is fair to say that most officers in the country behave this way, and that hard evidence doesn't matter. I find that ridiculous. I find actually that we should be looking at hard evidence and not emotion. Of course it hurts when your son or daughter is shot and killed by a police officer or a thief. But the truth is that the evidence matters, because if there was a reason for why that person was shot, then you want to know. You don't want to ruin the officer's life because hard evidence doesn't matter. You want to make sure that you know what you're talking about and that you know exactly what happened. I don't agree with that, not at all. And I think, okay.
Yeah, we can keep going with this further in the Q&A section, but we're going to go into we'll go away from that topic and go into the third topic. So, mental health. So, according to a study that was in a study that was conducted in 2014 by the National Institute of Mental Health, there was about an estimated 43.6 million adults, which is about 18% of adults in the United States, that had an AMI, which stands for any mental illness. And of these, this population is not, of the population that was studied in the study, is not entirely representative of the entire population. So there are homeless, active duty military personnel, and adults that didn't go in to report that they had a mental illness, but they might not even know they have a mental illness. And we have children under the age of 18. So with this in mind, how do we, this figure is just more of a conceptualization, but with that number 9, how do we ensure adequate mental health coverage for all Americans? And as well, how do we provide mental health coverage for veterans as well?
I suppose it's our turn to go first. I will say that mental health is a topic that is particularly close to me. Excuse me. And I think the main problem that we need to start with that needs to be changed in order for us to get, legislative laws passed for us to make changes on a direct healthcare spectrum would be the stigma involved with it. And that's the biggest thing. For example, my mom, she suffered from epilepsy, which is a mental nerve disorder. And she, that condition is still not a condition that's very widely known about. And there is still stigma that goes with it. And this stigma, even though it has come a long way from, say, 100 years ago, where we would have, these mental hospitals where we just lock people up and everything for conditions like that, and even conditions such as depression or, ADHD or simple things that we don't see as, as crazy of a problem nowadays when it comes to, we should lock these people away. We still need to go further with it. I know, looking at depression, for example, there are tons of people out there who suffer from depression and suffer from suicidal thoughts and harmful self-harm actions. And I think it all goes back to the stigma involved with it, which is why these people aren't able to reach out for what help is there. I do believe that we should increase the ability for people to be able to see, psychiatrists and specialists regarding depression, mainly because it affects a large portion of the population. And I forget the exact percentage. I know I saw it on a stall talk one day. But it's up there in somewhere over a quarter of college, kids suffer from some type of depression. And what little help is available out there, people don't want to reach to because of the stigma. So I believe that before we can even talk about how to better treat mental health conditions in our healthcare system, we need to, as a society, accept and better understand these conditions, because if we don't change the thought process of the stigma related with it, then we're not going to be able to pass any laws, and we're not going to be able to change anything, because everyone's still going to have the same mindset, regardless of the care available. If no one feels that they have the ability to do that because they'd either be looked down upon or other, such actions like that, then it's not worth it if we, make it available. So we need to start with the stigma of it. And I don't know if you would think that.
It also needs to be a call to action. There are some people out there who can help themselves, who will help themselves. My mother, after I was born, suffered from postpartum depression, and thankfully she recognized it. She noticed something was up, and she went to a doctor, and she got help, and now she's living a much better life because she did that. But we also need to recognize that there are people out there who just, for some reason or another, are so afflicted they cannot help themselves. And instead of ignoring them, we actually have to participate. We have to do something to make their lives better, so that they can get the correct treatment and they can essentially live better lives in the future. You don't want to be the fault for that person having a horrible life or potentially doing something very awful to themselves just because you didn't want to get involved. We have to start taking responsibility, and we have to start looking at each other and think, if there's something wrong, we need to say something, we need to speak up.
All right, move on to Democrats.
So I'm just gonna start off by saying that I am a senior in our psychology department. So mental health is something that I've had tons and tons of experience with. My whole entire life, I suffered personally from anxiety. So it is something that is near and dear to my heart. Going off of what they said, that we do need to decrease the stigma that happens in our world. We constantly are saying things like, you're having a bad day, like, oh, I'm so depressed today. Like, no, you're not depressed, you're upset because you failed a test. Or like, you're a neat freak, oh, I'm so OCD about how I have my room. No, you don't have obsessive compulsive disorder, you just like things clean. So I think it starts off with just us having the right terminology and the right language when we are discussing mental illness. And as far as us getting rights for people, when you look at our homeless population, the mental health rate is it's through the roof. That's because when institutions became deinstitutionalized, everyone became homeless because their families either passed away or they were ostracized from their families. That's why they were in an institution. So when you have people on the streets that are suffering from mental illness, they reproduce with each other. They have children that also suffer from those mental illnesses. So it's important for us to try to get into those communities and try to help those people, get them treatment or do whatever we can. and also to help kind of going off this little tangent with birth control as well with that community, just because we don't want to be adding more to that population of mental illness. And as you also stated with our veterans, PTSD is a horrible disorder that it's so traumatic, but it is part of the name. But like, it's just so sad that they come back, they're not debriefed at all. We don't even know what some of them see. I have a cousin that went through PTSD. He can't talk about what he saw and what he did when he was away to his own wife. And for her, she's like, why can't he just come back in and be a part of our family? And for him, it's like, because I saw things and I had to do things, I had to make decisions that I can't discuss with you, and that like hurts me as a human that I had to do some of those things. So we do need to be better as far as helping out those people when they come back. But yeah, I think it does definitely start at just like our communities and ourselves as being more educated and accepting people, and not just looking down like, oh, you're depressed, like just be happy or just get over it. Like we do have to accept that whole community.
I echo things my Democrat and Libertarian peers have said, especially in terms of increasing awareness and decreasing stigma. I'd like to really touch a lot more on the veterans issue, the veterans aspect of this question. I'm encouraged that going around Facebook right now is the 22 challenge, where people do 22 push-ups for 22 days to raise awareness for the 22 veterans each day that commit suicide. Many of them are suffering from post-traumatic stress, and it encourages me that somebody is speaking up, because this group largely is not somebody that wants to draw attention to themselves or ask for other people to serve, because it is in their nature to serve, and that's why they made the sacrifice and got those invisible wounds served that they did. In terms of the VA, I think the major change that needs to happen is I would like to see a voucher program take place at the current VA hospitals, because the current VA hospitals are horrible. We need to treat our veterans better. They deserve much better than what we're treating them. And with a voucher, they can take that anywhere, and outside health providers can compete for their services, and they'll get a much higher quality of care than they would if they can only go to one VA hospital. Anybody had a rebuttal?
Yeah, I just would like to add very briefly that I think we touched a lot on the stigma of mental health, which is really important. But I think another thing that wasn't touched on as much is the expansion of comprehensive health care for individuals who suffer from mental illness, especially in groups like the homeless population that don't have comprehensive health care. Universal programs need to be put in place to allow those who don't have those resources to obtain those resources.
And going off of that, okay, so turn the mic, he turned the mic on. Real quick. Yeah, with mental health, so our insurance companies, as of right now, they let you pay for the fastest, quickest treatment to be able to cure whatever's going on with you. So they're gonna pay for medication. They're gonna allow you to see a psychiatrist every now and then, just to have your medication checked up on, make sure that you're still doing good, but they're not gonna pay for the therapy and the talk part of that. And when you're looking at a comprehensive to really be able to help someone, you need the talk therapy and you need medication, depending on how severe. But at the end of the day, talk therapy, especially CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the best form of treatment for an individual. CBT actually doesn't even use medication, and it has been shown to affect people's chemical makeup in their brain and actually change them. So someone that might have had depression before, going through CBT, can come out without having depression anymore. So I think it's important to look at the whole picture, not just the quickest, easiest treatment.
Angel, and you guys have any rebuttals?
I would just like to add on to that with the idea, of course, of healthcare wanting to do the quickest, fastest treatment. And again, only to reiterate that this entirely goes back to the stigma of the way that we think of mental health. Because, for example, if you break your leg, they are going to give you the quickest, fastest way to fix your leg, which may often be a cast or a splint of some kind. And in the end, the leg is fixed. But because we don't think of mental health as being anything as more than something that can be just fixed with pills, thus the example that she gave, that's why we're not able to comprehensively fix it, because we're not actually fixing the whole thing. It would be similar as if a doctor looked at a broken bone and said, yeah, if you just lie in bed, maybe it'll heal on its own without actually going through and doing the entire process. And again, we just need to instill, especially into these insurance companies that are looking for the quickest, fastest method, that the talk part, as she put it, is a requirement, not an option.
Kelsey, we'll move on to the last topic.
So the final topic we're going to discuss this evening is on foreign policy, specifically relating to the Middle East, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So recently, large coalitions of forces, including Iraqi and U.S. forces, have initiated an offensive to liberate the Iraqi city of Mosul from ISIS control and other military operations in the region. What do you think the U.S. role should be in Iraq with regards to our current involvement of military personnel currently deployed and with the current situation in Afghanistan?
Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I come from what many call a more isolationist point of view, because I don't think that we should be policing the world, and I think that the main reason that we have this unrest in the Middle East is all our fault in the first place. If you go back and look at the Iranian Revolution, for example, basically we took a democratic government and overthrew it and installed a religious power into it. And I'm dead serious. If you look up Iranian women 1960s, you can't tell the difference between them and women in Southern California in the 1960s, because they used to be a democratic society that was exactly like most other democratic societies at the time, and they had all the freedoms that everyone else did. But because we decided to meddle with foreign policies and create and seed this revolution and causing this religious sect to take control in the nation, and that slowly devolved into the Middle East that many people stereotype today, where it's very strictly Islamic, and that's enforced by religious police and all that, thus creating all of this unrest in the Middle East between Israel and all the Islamic countries, thus creating all these terrorist groups, thus creating the problem we have today. So honestly, we caused this problem in the first place. We did. And I don't think us continuing to stick our noses in it and try to police other parts of the world is going to add anything more to it.
20 seconds.
And
Ben, you want to?
if Ben wants to add anything else, I'm sorry.
It's just to put it in perspective, a lot of people like to, or at least I personally look back to Vietnam was a war that a lot of people look back and think, why exactly did we fight in it? Why exactly did we go into Vietnam, a country that we really had no business with? The reason why we stepped our foot in the first place is still very questionable to this day. And I almost look at the Middle East and say the exact same thing. Yes, we had to retaliate for the terrible terroristic events that have happened over the years, but it seems just ridiculous now, the fact that we are still in there. It's been 15 years since September 11th, the first real event that got us in here in the first place, and we still can't solve it. It boggles my mind, the fact that we are still putting our foot in the Middle East, when if we just left it alone, we might not have to deal with the problems we're dealing with today. I think that there are way too many soldiers that have been away from home way too long, and they're still fighting in the Middle East. Granted, there are still some soldiers out there who still want to keep fighting, and they still won't rest until the job is done.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, to answer the question specifically, what should our policy be moving forward? A lot of people say, support our troops, bring them home. I don't think that would be supporting our troops. I think a better statement would be support our troops, let them win. We have sunk so many dollars in American lives into this region that to pull them out of there right now would be a repeat of 2011, when the war was on the decline and things were on the up and up, and then Obama decided, I want to end this war, and that created a power vacuum, and now
add a little bit to that, and that is that, yes, I agree. In Afghanistan, I think that the Obama administration has actually had to backpedal and say that we will be staying past the 2017 exit red line or point that had been established by the Obama administration because the Taliban is gaining stronger footholds. The Al-Qaeda, these different groups are too much for the current forces to handle, the current government forces to handle. They simply don't have the training, they don't have the technology, etc. And we've spent, like Anthony said, too much money and too many lives in there to just leave it, and it would, I think, further exacerbate the problem. However, I do disagree. I think that to blame us for all of the issues in the Middle East is an absolute oversimplification of the complexities of the region. While I think it does, a lot of it stem back to World War I, and yes, Western powers redrawing maps, not very much based on knowledge of the ethnic groups and sectarian movements in the region at the time. I know that has a lot to do with it, but before and after that, there are many issues in the region. For example, Saddam Hussein, you can talk about who put him in power and who did not, and conspiracy theories and whatnot. But the American government, even though I don't think we should have been in that country at the time, we didn't install Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein thought himself to be the descendant of Abu Bakr, one of the first caliphs of Muhammad. Let me just take a few seconds to finish up here. And so to say that there wasn't religious, that there was no religious backing to a lot of these struggles and strife in the Middle East before the installment of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, I think is an oversimplification and quite frankly just wrong.
I think that although it may be an oversimplification to say that we are the only problem in the Middle East, I think that we have exacerbated a lot of the issues going on in those countries. And it's been a conflict, this specific conflict has been going on for 15 years and upwards of 15 years, with other conflicts predating 9/11. So I do think that moving forward, we do need to start bringing troops home. And it may not be a sudden, it may not be in a day, but we need to start working toward bringing our troops back home and not staying in this conflict indefinitely over the course of several different presidencies and administrations.
And also, when President Bush had made the statement that we are going to never fight or never end the war on terrorism, terrorism is always going to be in this world. Unfortunately, I'd love it if we could, just be peaceful and, get along, but that's not the case. So when someone makes that kind of statement that we're never going to stop fighting the war on terrorism, it literally can never end. We're always going to be fighting. So I think, kind of going on with what Chelsea said, that maybe not happening in a day that we're going to suddenly start bringing people home, but to start kind of closing where we are in communities abroad and just kind of like, slowly and gradually making people kind of go back to how, things should be without us there, and maybe always protecting or fighting. And I think it was interesting as well of what the libertarians have pointed out, that in the 60s, it was so much different there. And I do think that we have had a major impact in the Middle East. I know there's been a lot of revolutions, a lot of women empowerment lately. They've been kind of telling ISIS to kind of screw off and have really been making a lot of good forwards and leaps and trying to get those rights back that they did have in the 60s. So I don't want to just say that we were there and we caused all these problems, because I think that we have helped. But I do think that at the same time we have also kind of made some issues in other areas as well.
Anybody want rebuttal?
Yes, if I could. The Republicans talked about how, since we've already spent so much money and we've already risked and had many soldiers give their lives for this cause, that that's why we should continue fighting it. To preface this, I am a big supporter of our troops. I can't speak highly enough about the sacrifice that they're willing to make for their country and for the rest of our lives so that we can live the lives that we do. But basically what you're arguing is against the economic principle of sunk costs, where you're basically saying that we can go to the mother of a soldier who lost his life fighting in Iraq or Iran or Afghanistan or any of these countries and saying, well, because your son gave his life, we might as well, we need to keep on going, because then in order to honor your son, we need to risk these other lives. And I don't think that continuing the war on terrorism, as the Democrats brought up with George Bush saying that we're gonna, the war on terrorism is never gonna end. I'd just like to point out that the only difference between terrorism and freedom fighters is whether or not they're willing to give us oil. So, it's a big mess over there that we don't need to get involved in. And I mean, we don't need to be the police of the world. And I know there was a time in World War II where, our country, as well as some other countries such as Russia and the United Kingdom, stepped up and took down tyranny. But that doesn't mean that those same rules apply, because there isn't this, great force that we're going against. In this case, we are now policing and interfering with other people's, in some cases, democracies, as I've explained before, and other people's countries, which we just shouldn't do.
All right, good.
All right, you mentioned the sunk cost fallacy. This isn't the F-35 we're talking about. This isn't a plane that, I'm pretty sure you know, it's been trillions of dollars are spent on it, and the same arguments made for that we can't cut it out, we've already spent too much money. These are American lives. I wouldn't want to go up to that soldier's mother and say, your son died for nothing, or your daughter died for nothing. I do agree with you largely that we shouldn't have to be the world's policeman, and that we shouldn't involve ourselves in nation building moving forward. What I'm saying is that we need to loosen the rules of engagement, and we need to, as Obama said, we need to destroy and degrade ISIS, and I'd like to see a more genuine effort towards doing that, and doing that quickly, both in terms of money and lives, because it can be done, and it can be done quickly if we put our mind to it.
And I understand where you're coming from, of course, with, trying, and we don't want to make, their sacrifices for naught, but again, I don't think that you can use their sacrifices and the justification of their sacrifices as an excuse to continue to risk American lives for something that we shouldn't be involved in.
And if we're so serious about destroying ISIS, if we are, then why are we the ones who are spending trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars to eliminate it? And you did mention how there are some other United Nations, but still an overwhelming majority of American forces in the Middle East. If the world was serious about destroying these threats, then why haven't more people jumped in?
One of the reasons has to do with the membership of and the demographics of the United Nations, which, as much as we like to look up to as some sort of holy and righteous establishment of international law, is oftentimes not at all that. It is, in fact, the very opposite. We can look at the United Nations the United Nations Council on Human Rights, for example, or since 2006 known as the Human Rights Commission, and we've had chairmen for them such as Muammar Gaddafi and Castro. Their members are at least 47 members of the UN General Assembly, and among those 47 members, we have a great majority of whether African or East Asian or whatever the case, Islamic majority, Sharia law propping up countries. And so that has a lot to do with why we're not able to do what we really want to do in those regions, because the UN is not just, well, let's all get together and go destroy the bad guys. We should be able to do that, but the truth is that a lot of the bad guys are within there voting no. And they're buying votes from South American countries who have an interest in the money and the politics of it all. And so apart from that bureaucracy, which is the UN, one which I'm not particularly fond of, I also have to disagree with you on the definition or the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter, because I think a terrorist is one who targets civilians knowingly innocent lives knowingly and willfully, the way they did on 9/11. Afghanistan and Iraq are two different things, but as far as Afghanistan is concerned, it's not that I don't care about the lives who are going to be sacrificed in order to end this. It's that, one, the Obama administration has now had to backtrack and say that not only are we going to be there 5 more years, 10 more years, we're possibly going to be there decades to actually be able to leave this place in a sensible state. And it's not only the lives of our troops that matter. We talk about refugees a lot. Well, guess what's coming out of Afghanistan? Refugees, lives, innocents, those who are being murdered by Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And so it is not the troops who don't want to go there and die. I want to send those who are willing to go and who care about what they're doing. And that's, I presume, why they joined the military. It's not that I don't care about their lives.
But let's
Yes.
open this up to the audience. If you guys have any